Hello Daily Drafters, and welcome to the continuation of the Kamigawa Neon Dynasty Archetype Skeleton set review. Here at Daily Draft, we do things a little differently when it comes to set review season. Rather than give a card-by-card analysis and grade each card individually, here we build what are called Archetype Skeletons, one for each color pair. This isn't a concept that I came up with on my own. In fact, it was a common way to provide set review content before card-by-card reviews became more popular. But here at Daily Draft, we'd like to bring them back as I really do think that they can be a valuable resource for determining what each of the 10 color pairs might look like prior to your first drafts of the set. Now, obviously, we won't get everything correct, and these skeletons should be used for the first few drafts of the set for you. As the format evolves and we learn more about the cards in the set and how they interact with each other, the skeletons will evolve as well. But hopefully, these provide a good baseline for you to begin the format. Before we get into today's skeleton, I'd like to give you a breakdown of exactly how I arrived at what I did when it comes to what quantities of each rarity of card that will be included in each deck. I went ahead and collected data from each of the 46 Crimson Vow drafts on the channel when it comes to how many mythics, rares, uncommons, and commons each deck had, and I took an average for each rarity. That average came out to 2 mythic rares or rares, 5 uncommons, and 16 commons. Those numbers, plus 17 lands, make our 40-card draft deck. In addition, I will allow 4 commons to be a 2-of inclusion if I deem necessary, bringing the total to 8 1-of commons and 4 2-of commons. Don't worry, it'll all make sense as we get going. Lastly, I'd like to give a special shout out and thank you to all those in the subscriber community for choosing to spend a part of your day here with me. And for those of you that aren't subscribed yet, go ahead and click that red subscribe button attached to this video. Remember, it's absolutely free, doesn't cost you a dime, and you'll then be able to stay updated all through preview season and into draft season for Kamigawa Neon Dynasty. With that out of the way, let's dive into our skeleton for the day. In today's video, we'll be taking a look at green-red, starting with the green-red Signpost Uncommon, which is Invigorating Hot Spring. For 1, a red and a green, it is an enchantment at uncommon. It says Invigorating Hot Spring enters the battlefield with 4 +1/+1 counters on it. It says that modified creatures you control have haste, and you can remove a 1/1 counter from this card, put a 1/1 counter on target creature you control, activate only as a sorcery and only once each turn. So again, modified refers to any creatures you control that are equipped with an equipment, have an aura attached to it that you control, and or have a counter of any kind on it. And Invigorating Hot Spring really adds to the modification of creatures by providing those creatures with 1/1 counters. This card reminds me a lot of Rhythm of the Wild from, what set was that? That was Ravnica Allegiance a while ago, if any of you were playing during that time. And I really think this is going to be a big piece to the red-green deck in this format, because every single creature you play for basically the rest of the game after you drop this card, which is the next 4 creatures, but it could be the rest of the game because they're all going to enter with an extra +1/+1 counter and get haste when you use this ability. Now, obviously, they can kill the creature in response and it won't have haste or any of that kind of stuff, but that could happen either way. This allows your next 4 creatures that you play to be immediate threats on the board, which is going to be big game, and I think this is going to be one of the best performing cards in this deck for good reason. Next up, we've got Iron Apprentice, which for 1 generic mana is a 0/0 artifact creature construct at common. It says that Iron Apprentice enters the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter on it, and when it dies, if it had counters on it, put those counters on target creature you control. I've mentioned in previous videos, as far as these skeletons go, that there are a couple cards that are maybe like 23rd playables, fringe playable cards. I think this one falls into that category, and I think if there's a deck at all in this format for Iron Apprentice, I do think it's red-green, because first of all, it's a 1-mana creature that enters that is already modified, and if it dies, you can then modify a different creature. Red-green cares about modifications, that's its whole thing, and this creature provides itself being modified, and then lets a future creature become modified as well. I think that's good enough to include a copy of it in most red-green decks, at least to start out, but I think this one could be one I'm wrong about, and it just ends up being a little too inconsequential for the effects that you get. But I'm willing to start out with a copy here in red-green. Next up, we've got Rabbit Battery, which for 1 red mana is a 1/1 artifact creature equipment rabbit at uncommon. It has haste, and it says equipped creature gets +1/+1 and has haste, and has a reconfigure cost of 1 red. Again, reconfigure means that you can have this creature act as an equipment by paying 1 red to equip a different creature you control, giving that new creature +1/+1 in haste. As far as modifications go, this is a very good recurable 1 mana way to modify different creatures in your deck. It doesn't start out as being modified because it exists as a 1 mana 1/1 haste to start, but you can think of this mainly as an equipment past to turn 2 or 3, and at that point, for only 1 mana, the rest of your creatures can enter the battlefield with haste +1/+1 and be modified for the rest of your keywords that care about that. So I really do think Rapid Battery is going to fit in very well in red-green modified decks. Next up is Simian Sling, which for 1 red mana is a 1/1 artifact creature equipment monkey at common, and it says equipped creature gets +1/+1, and whenever Simian Sling or equipped creature becomes blocked, it deals 1 damage to defending player, and it has reconfigure for 2 generic mana. So Simian Sling is basically just a worse Rabbit Battery, but this one is at common. So if you're not able to get that equipment and reconfigure effect in Rabbit Battery that you're looking for in your modified decks, I think Simian Sling is going to do a fine job replacing it because again, it's a 1 mana way to get an equipment on the battlefield. It gives a nice little buff to your creature, and the reconfigure cost of 2, you get a little bit of extra bonus by having it deal 1 damage to the defending player when it becomes blocked. But the reconfigure cost of 2 generic mana is going to be good enough to include in most decks that care about modifications. Next up, we've got 2 copies of Voltage Surge, which for 1 red mana is an instant at common that says, and as an additional cost to cast this spell, you may sacrifice an artifact. Voltage Surge deals 2 damage to target creature or planeswalker. If the spell's additional cost was paid, it deals 4 damage instead. So if you saw yesterday's video for red-white, you noticed that there were 2 copies of this in that deck. There are also 2 copies of this in this deck. There will be 2 copies of this in both of the red decks going forward, spoiler alert. It's a very good removal spell. 1 mana to deal 2 to target creature or planeswalker is a fine enough deal, and if you just have a random artifact you don't care about sitting on the battlefield, and you really need to get rid of an X4, you can do that as well. You're absolutely going to want to include just about as many of these as you can get in really any red deck. Moving right along to Akki Ember-Keeper, which for 1 and a red is a 2/1 enchantment creature goblin warrior at common, and it says whenever a non-token modified creature you control dies, create a 1/1 colorless spirit creature token. This was also included in our red-white skeleton yesterday because it's a warrior, but this is going to be the deck where this card shines. I currently only have 1 copy of it in our skeleton here, but that's mainly because the red-green deck, when looking through the commons and uncommons, specifically the commons, there's a lot of really good commons for this deck. I have high expectations for this deck, and I wasn't able to include this as a 2-of. It's very possible you'd want 2 of these cards in this red-green deck, or maybe even more. But right now I've got it as a 1-of because, again, red-green cares about modified. This pays you off for having modified. And, you know, if you have more than 1 Akki Ember-Keeper on the battlefield at the time that a modified creature you control dies, they both will trigger and give you multiple 1/1s off of that, which is a pretty big swing in your favor just from a couple of commons. So I really do think this has the potential to be an overperformer specifically in this deck. Next, we've got Coiling Stalker, which for 1 and a green is a 2/1 creature snake ninja at common. It has ninjutsu for 1 and a green, and it says whenever Coiling Stalker deals combat damage to a player, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control that does not have a +1/+1 counter on it. A little bit weird that they gave a couple of green cards ninjutsu, but it's really only upside at the end of the day, right? I mean, it's a 2 mana 2/1, which I know is below rate nowadays, but at the end of the day, if this connects once, you get to modify another creature you control. I mean, I've only got 1 copy of it here in this deck, so I don't think it's going to be a super important part of this red-green deck, but I don't think you're going to cut the first copy, especially because nowadays 2-drops are getting so important and limited, and making sure you have a high density of them is going to be very important. And if you are able to sneak this in, you can even put the counter on itself, and then this becomes modified, which further allows it to have better attacks going forward to modify something else. So I think this could be a pretty good card in this deck, and if there's any green deck in the format where this card would fit, it would be this one. Next up is Explosive Entry, which for 1 and a red is a sorcery at common. It says destroy up to 1 target artifact, put a +1/+1 counter on up to 1 target creature. I think there's enough artifacts running around in this set that I think main decking one of these is going to be fine. Maybe I'll be proven wrong on that, but there's a lot of random artifact creatures running around, and this could kill a creature and put a 1/1 counter on a creature you control. Note that it says up to one target artifact, so you don't even need to have a target if you just want to put a counter on your creature and give it a modification. So there is a chance that this could end up underperforming in your deck if your opponent's not running very many artifacts, but again, I think that there's going to be enough of them running around that main decking a copy of Explosive Entry is going to be just fine in these modification decks that care about the counter you get on the backside. Next we have Kami's Flare, which for 1 and a red is an instant at common, and it says Kami's Flare deals 3 damage to target creature or planeswalker. Kami's Flare also deals 2 damage to that permanent's controller if you control a modified creature. Not much more to say about Kami's Flare here, other than this is probably going to be one of the absolute best commons in this deck, if not the entire set. And in red-green specifically that cares most about modifications, you're going to get that extra 2 damage. So 1 in a red to deal 3 to something and deal 2 to their face is an insanely great deal, kind of like a B+ of a card. You will absolutely want 2 copies of it in this deck. And you know what? I didn't let myself have 4, but if you can have 4, go for 4. Next up is 2 copies of Master's Rebuke, which for 1 and a green is an instant at common that says target creature you control deals damage equal to its power to target creature or planeswalker you don't control. So for those of you that have been playing long enough to play it in limited formats that have Rabid Bite in it, Rabid Bite is this exact card at sorcery. So they've given us a common that is strictly better than Rabid Bite because it's now an instant, and Rabid Bite has always been basically green's best removal spell that we've seen in a long time, and this is strictly better than it. So this is going to perform very well in green. It very well might be the best green common in the set. I think it fits into most green decks except very small green decks very well, and we are happy to include 2 of them here in this deck. Moving right along to Orochi Merge-Keeper for 1 and a green. It's a 1/1 creature snake druid at uncommon. You can tap it to add a green, and as long as it is modified, you can tap it to add 2 green. This card's great. 2 mana dorks are great in limited. They ramp you from 2 to 4 the turn you play them, and if you can somehow modify this, just put a 1/1 counter on it using some of the cards we've already seen, it can get really out of hand ramping you with 2 green. Anytime you see 2 mana cards in limited that tap to add, particularly a mana of any color, but even just a green, prioritize them highly. This will go in most green decks, but especially this one where modifications are not trivial at all to pull off and put on top of this creature to make it tap for 2 instead of 1. Next up is Upriser Renegade, which for 1 and a red is a 1/3 creature human samurai at uncommon, and it says Upriser Renegade gets +2/+0 for each other modified creature you control. Another creature that cares about modifications on other creatures. Note that if this creature is modified, that does not give it an additional +2/+0. It has to be a different modified creature. But if you have 2 other modified creatures, this is a 2 mana 5/3. Which is kind of insane, and I don't think it's going to be very difficult to make this a 2 mana 3/3 that often. Now, do know that if you want to get into combat with this card and you only have 1 other modified creature, if they kill the other modified creature and you blocked, let's say they're 3/3 to try to trade, and they kill your other modified creature in response, this will revert back to a 1/3 and get eaten. So watch out for a couple of corner case scenarios in combat with this. But at the end of the day, I think the upside on this card is very high, particularly in red-green. Next is Heir of the Ancient Fang, which is 2 and a green for a 2/3 creature snake samurai at common. It says Heir of the Ancient Fang enters the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter on it if you control a modified creature. Again, another creature that keys off of modified, and if you already have 1, this one enters as a 3 mana 3/4 that is modified itself, which is great. And the corner case scenario of only getting a 3 mana 2/3 sometimes is not the end of the world. Obviously, you like better than that, but you could do worse with a common, let's put it that way. And the upside of this card is like B level upside, and the downside is like C-. So I think the average taking, B-, even a C+ a lot of the time is going to be just fine with Heir of the Ancient Fang. Next we have Careful Cultivation, which for 2 and a green is an enchantment aura at common. It says enchant artifact or creature, and as long as enchanted permanent is a creature, it gets +1/+3 and has reach, and has tap for 2 green mana. Or you can channel it for 1 and a green, which means you discard this card and create a 1/1 green human monk creature token with tap to add a green. This card is generically powerful. Its second option is a 2 mana 1/1 that taps for a green that has flash, which is really good. And its first option, I don't know how often the first option is going to come up, but when it does, it's going to be good. Again, this provides a modification for your creature if you want to use the first half. Also, +1/+3 in reach is going to make it really hard for your opponent to be able to get in past this in combat. Not to mention, you could also have it be a mana dork if you wanted to. I think Careful Cultivation is going to be a pretty key part to most green decks in this format, especially ones that want to ramp. You're probably going to see 2 copies of this in the blue-green deck whenever that comes up. But here, we've got just 1 copy, and you're going to want to look to channel this more often than you use the first half. Next, we've got our first rare or mythic rare in Jugan Defends the Temple, which for 2 and a green is a mythic enchantment saga, and strap in, there's a lot of text on this one. Chapter 1 says create a 1/1 green human monk creature token with tap to add a green. Chapter 2 says put a +1/+1 counter on each of up to 2 target creatures. And Chapter 3 says exile this saga, then return it to the battlefield transformed under your control into Remnant of the Rising Star, which is a 2/2 enchantment creature dragon spirit with flying that says whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, you may pay X, and when you do, put X +1/+1 counters on that creature. And as long as you control 5 or more modified creatures, Remnant of the Rising Star gets +5/+5 and has trample. So obviously a lot of text there, and you can probably disregard that very last line of text here on Remnant of the Rising Star. It's probably not going to come up that often, and if it does, you've basically won the game already. But if you flip this into a 2/2 flyer, you can start throwing around counters on other creatures you control. The front side creates a mana dork. It modifies 2 other creatures for you. This is just a stone cold bomb in green-red and an absolute reason to draft this deck. Next is Kodama of the West Tree, which for 2 and a green is a 3/3 legendary creature spirit at Mythic Rare. It has reach. It also says that modified creatures you control have trample, and whenever a modified creature you control deals combat damage to a player, search your library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle. So our baseline here is a 3 mana 3/3 reach, which is already great. It gives a little bit of upside in that all your modified creatures have trample, which is fine, not great. And then whenever a creature you control deals combat damage, modified specifically, you get to ramp and put a land on the battlefield. Everything about this is great. This fits right into our red-green modified deck. It's great at the baseline. It's great at its top end. Everything on this text is just gravy on top of an already fine creature to put in your deck. So we're obviously going to go ahead and include it as our second rare/mythic rare here in red-green. Moving on to the 4-drops, we have Jukai Preserver, which is 3 and a green for a 3/3 enchantment creature human druid at common. And it says when Jukai Preserver enters the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. You can also channel it for 2 and a green, where you can discard this and put a +1/+1 counter on each of up to 2 target creatures you control. I put in 2 copies of this here because I think if there's any deck where this deserves to be 2 copies, it's red-green. The first one, its baseline is a 4 mana 4/4 modified creature. And if you already have a play on 4 and you don't have a play on 3, and you've already played a 1 and a 2 drop, then you can go ahead and channel this to modify both of your previous creatures, get in for more attacks. And I think this is going to be a very good enabler for the modified deck and creating opportunities for attacks you didn't normally have, but via its channel ability. We've also got Twinshot Sniper, which is 3 and a red for a 2/3 artifact creature goblin archer at uncommon. It has reach, and it says whenever Twinshot Sniper enters the battlefield, it deals 2 damage to any target, or you can channel it for 1 and a red to deal 2 damage to any target. Again, I included this in red-white, I included it in green-red, I'm probably going to include it in the other 2 red decks because I have a sneaking suspicion this might be the best uncommon in the set. It's insanely powerful, 4 mana 2/3 reach. Is not quite where we want to be raw stats-wise, but it's probably going to go ahead and kill another creature when it enters the battlefield, and it has a backup plan, 2 mana instant speed, deal 2 damage to any target. And again, both of those abilities can hit your opponent directly if you need to deal an extra 2 points of damage to them. So Twinshot Sniper is an insanely good uncommon that's probably going to be going in every single red deck in the format. And our last card for green-red here is Tales of Master Seshiro, which for 4 and a green is an enchantment saga at common. It says, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature or vehicle you control. It gains vigilance until end of turn. And chapter 3 says, exile this saga, then return it to the battlefield transformed under your control into Seshiro's Living Legacy, which is an 5/5 enchantment creature snake warrior that has vigilance and haste. So basically, this is a delayed 5 mana 5/5 that has vigilance and can also attack the turn you flip it. And the first 2 turns, it's wildly overcosted for the ability that you're getting. But again, the backside is so good that the first 2 are just, again, they're modifications to creatures you control, basically coming for free on a delayed 5/5 body. So obviously you can't play this when you're behind, otherwise these 1/1 counters will not do enough to help you stabilize. But if you're at all ahead or at parity, this card can go a long way in stabilizing you and making sure you have modifications on your creatures, that they're big enough to enter combat, and you're left over with the 5/5 in the end. I hope you find this video helpful in your preparation for Kamigawa Neon Dynasty. Be sure to stick around for the next video in this series, Blue-White, which will be hitting the channel at 3 p.m. Eastern Time later today. Check out the Neon Dynasty Archetype Skeleton playlist as well to find all of the skeletons in this series in one location. If you enjoyed this content, feel free to give it a like and share it with a friend or two, as there's a decent chance someone else might like it as well. If you're already subscribed to the channel, thanks for being here today, and if you're not, go ahead and click that subscribe button to stay on top of preview season and have access to consistent, high-quality drafts as soon as the set launches on Arena. Looks like that'll do it for this video. I'll see you for the next one.